Good morning and welcome to the Historic Site Preservation Board, City of Palm Springs, California, Tuesday, January 9th, 2018. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. Board Member Marsh has been excused. Member Kaiser? Here. Member Dixon?
Present.
Member Lavoie is also excused. Member Hayes? Here. Vice Chair Burkett? Here. And Chair Johns?
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. And may we have the report on the posting of the agenda?
The agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall Bulletin Board on the west side of the Council Chambers and in the Planning Department counter in accordance with applicable law.
Thank you very much. I understand that we'd like to adjust the agenda just a hair to bring in some city staff first.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we would suggest we have Councilmember Roberts and a member of the Engineering Department that will be bringing us an update on Cornelia White. We'd like to ask if we could bring those up before any of the new business is heard. And then under new business, we would like to take 4B before we take 4A, if that's possible.
All right, and I think that's just fine. Board? All right, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, this time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Preservation Board values your comments, pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. There will be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of the hearing. And ladies and gentlemen, we do not have a public hearing on our agenda today, so if you're here to address the board, now would be the time to do so. Any speakers, please come forward. Good morning, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We do.
My voice is a little dry today, so forgive me. Good morning. My name is Jade Nelson, Palm Springs native and owner of PS Walk With Me. Nearly every week, I conduct historic walking tours of Old Las Palmas, and the first house I talk about is located at 216 Via Lola. This house was designed by architect John Porter Clark and built by reputable local contractors Wilson and Florian in 1940. Here is a copy of the building permit notice from the Desert Sun newspaper. The home was constructed for pioneer Florian Boyd, who went on to become mayor in the 1950s. During his tenure, the airport opened and City Hall was built, thereby making him largely responsible for helping to bring Palm Springs into the modern era. Up until just a couple of months ago, 216 Via Lola had retained a high level of original integrity prior to being sold by the family of the first owner. It provided an excellent context on my tours as to the evolution and growth not only of Las Palmas, but of the city. The house was truly very important. Now half of it is gone, as you can see from these photographs. Being a Class 3 site by nature of its age, why was it not flagged for HSPB review prior to issuance of a work permit to remodel? We must not allow such significant historic resources to go unnoticed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. Anyone else in the audience wishing? Please come forward. Good morning. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Florian Boyd.
You'd come up a little closer, Florian. Thank you.
All right. My name is Florian Boyd. I'm a lifetime resident of Palm Springs. Grew up here. My family is the family that Jade mentioned in reference to this house. It was built in the 40s, late 30s, 40s by my grandfather, Florian Boyd Sr., who was very active, early resident of Palm Springs, former city councilman, former mayor. He was mayor when this building was dedicated. The house, as Jade said, is a John Porter Clark designed house. I have the original blueprints and plans, also as original elevation of the house. This is what the house looked like after construction. The house has been in my family, always been in my family until this summer when my sister lived in it after my grandmother died. My father died. It went into a trust, and my sister and I decided we could not continue to keep the house and needed some repairs. We sold the house. The people bought it were interested in refurbishing. That was what we hoped would happen. Instead, half of it's gone, and absolutely gone. There's probably nothing that can be done now. This is such a shame that it couldn't have been stopped, and that the city and the historical you people weren't somehow aware and couldn't have stopped it. It has been red tagged now. I don't know what the exact process is now. But it has been red tagged, and demolition has stopped. Bad loss to the city. This building here was designed by John Porter Clark, same architect of that residence. Beautiful home. We were really hoping to see it refurbished.
Mr. Boyd, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience this morning wishing to speak or address the board during public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment. Before we move onto the consent calendar, I'd like to thank Mr. Nelson and Mr. Boyd for bringing this to our attention. Linda, you and I have had a conversation similar to this. Dick, I know that this is very close to your heart. This is a situation where I think this falls under remodeling as opposed to demolition. And because they have pulled a remodeling permit and they have left significant portions of the property, and in particular the chimney, that this doesn't fall under any kind of city review. The discussion is ongoing as to whether this board should. How does the city alter its ordinance to include these types of renovations for our review? And I don't think that we have an answer today. Flynn, would you comment at all, please?
Sadly, the only thing I can say, it's important to designate before any work happens. That's really the best way.
All righty. Board, any comments? Please.
Is it possible that we could submit, like, you know, we did the other regulation we did on demo permits, to council to consider making a change, significant change in the regulation? Would that be, is that an option that we have?
This might be something that we'll need to discuss more fully, but it doesn't make sense to require all remodelings to come before the HSPB. Got to be criteria for doing that, and really the criteria is if they're on our list of potential properties, might be one of the ways to look at that. But again, every remodeling can come to HSPB.
But I wonder if there's, do you think there's any criteria that we could, that would make sense? I understand what you're saying. But, you know, when you get to the point that this is, it's like pushing it to the edge. So there might be a medium way step. Okay.
All right, well,
thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, I just,
please, Linda.
what does it mean that it's red tagged?
Red tag is when the Building and Safety Department halts all work on the property. To give you an example, my condominium was red tagged when my contractor did demolition work without pulling a permit. Just to give a sad example.
A personal example, perhaps. Yeah.
So what will be the end result of the red tagging?
The contractor needs to pull a permit, essentially.
He pulled no permit and did this work?
No, there were permits that were pulled for this work.
For this work? So in this case, he pulled the permit, it's red tagged, now what?
No, this hasn't been red tagged, I don't believe.
Oh, I thought someone said it is red tagged. Yes, Mr. Boyd said
Yeah, one of our
it's-
speakers did mention that the property has now been red tagged. Okay.
So then they would come into the Building and Safety Department and get a permit for the remodeling.
Okay, so they didn't pull permits then, is what you're saying? Because that's the only reason something is red tagged, is if they don't pull a permit. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Item number 1 on our consent calendar is approval of the minutes, December 12th, 2017. Board, did we all have a chance to look over the minutes? Any additions, corrections? Linda?
Move to approve as presented.
Mr. Kaiser's the second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone disapproving that? None.
And, Mr. Chair, may the record show that Member Marsh did show up at 9:07.
All right, thank you, Ken. All righty, so we do not have a public hearing. Prior to commencing our unfinished business, we will have the city staff, City Council Member J.R. Roberts is here to update us on the Cornelia White residence. I think he's right in the hall, yeah. We have an extra chair. We have. Thanks, Dan. That's going to help, I think. All right, good morning and welcome.
Morning,
Mr. Johnson, if you'd introduce yourself to the board, please.
Dave Johnston, D.W. Johnston Construction.
Thank you.
Green, DW Johnson Construction.
Thank you, Rick. Mr. Roberts,
In
thank
case
you.
that didn't get recorded, that's Rick Green with DW Construction. So I'm here to actually say very little. So what we have today is Dave Johnston, who is the person that has put together, who's been working on this continually with us in terms of the restoration of the Cornelia White House. He took the original bids and the original methods, which we knew we couldn't afford, went through it, and actually found what I see is a much less invasive way to go about restoring the Cornelia White House. There's still some things that are going to be broken in this house, but this plan will give it what it needs to last, but without doing quite the damage that the other plan did. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave and to Marcus to explain it all to you.
Thank you, JR.
Yeah, you bet.
Good morning.
Good morning, Marcus.
We're happy to be here. I know this has been a long wait for you, so I appreciate your patience. As a bit of history, Dave Johnston was here many years ago and outlined an approach to restoring the structure. And the recommendation at that point was to retain an architect to basically develop plans for that restoration. We retained Rule Young at that point, who came in and proposed a method of restoration which the board decided was not recommended, and directed Rule Young to retain an architectural historic firm, which the city did, ARG. ARG then proceeded to develop a report, which we've provided to you as a means of walking you through, again, the structure and the areas that are in need of repair. ARG completed their report. We presented that to the City Council, and at that point was asking City Council to approve a further amendment to move forward with final engineering of the scope of work ARG had outlined. But I did explain to the City Council that that estimate for that work was upwards of $1 million. And so the City Council at that point denied that action, basically directed staff to work with Councilmember Roberts and come up with, again, an alternative approach that's more cost-effective, which is why we're here today, again, with Dave Johnston. And Dave will help walk us through the structure and explain the method of his approach and why it is the least intrusive approach, we believe, and would recommend your approval so we can move forward. Thank you. Dave?
Thank you. Rick Green and myself have been working on this for the better part of 4 years of one type or another of restoration or renovation.
Dave, our new microphones require that you just actually face it. Just have it.
Oh, okay, better?
I think that's, yes, it is. Thanks.
Okay. So we, as Marcus stated, we started early on and reviewed some original proposals that the city had received for some restoration. Basically, it was centered around windows, doors, siding, roofing, and some a lot of cosmetic items. So we had put together some numbers and presented them to the city. And at one time, those were accepted, or we thought they were going to be accepted. Along with that, we also volunteered our time to establish a new landscape plan and install that landscaping at no charge to the city. Because one of the biggest problems with that facility was that the water was spraying directly onto the facility from all the irrigation. And you had a lot of dry rot, and it continued on, and we said, look, you got to get the water off the building. Well, one thing that they have done since that 4-year period started is they have appears to have gotten the water off the buildings from spraying onto the building, which is a benefit. And then, as Marcus said, that all got kind of shot down to a certain point, I think, for whatever reason. I'm uncertain as to why. But as things developed, we became more involved again. We were asked to become involved again by Steve Nichols and by Chris Mills. So we jumped into it, came up with some preliminary costs, sat down with JR, sat down with Marcus, went through some preliminary costs, and thought we had maybe a better way to approach this by bringing on another structural engineer with some different ideas, different approaches, ways to approach the structure that is less invasive to the outside of the structure and more cost effective. So the city secured the services of a local structural engineer. He put together a plan. What we did is we prepared an as-built drawing for him to work off of, and then he prepared a structural plan and analysis that we've used as a baseline for our scope of work that we're proposing. The differences are, I don't know how involved you have been in reviewing what was presented by the original company, the original consulting group and Rule, but no matter how you looked at it, there was still material being removed on the inside of the structure to access and to gain access to allow bolts to be placed. So not only was the outside of the structure being compromised, but the inside of the structure was also being compromised. So our approach is that we're only going to compromise the inside of the structure in certain areas where the railroad ties are. And to do that, we're removing the drywall / board finishes that are in there, replacing them with like materials, installing shear panel instead of through bolts drilled from. We'd have to remove the roof to have these through bolts placed all the way through, drilled all the way through the railroad ties, connecting at the bottom plate, connecting at the top plate, and connecting to the roof system. So our approach was, and what Rez had come up with, was the structural engineer had come up with, was an approach to remove the finishes that were coming off anyway because of the bolting. No matter how you approach it, the finishes are still coming off. Then coming in, installing the shear panel, then putting like finishes back onto the areas that are noted on the plan. And if you look at the original report, the draft report that Marcus prepared, if you go to page third page, our yellow, and page 3 denotes the areas in brown that are the railroad ties. Wall type A. And those are the areas that we would be removing the interior finishes and installing the wood shear panel, plywood shear panel. And then there are some metal brackets that we would install that connect down to the floor system and to the joist system or the flooring system. And that was our approach for that type of area. The other area that was in question, which is wall type B and wall type C, is a board and batten placed over a wood frame system. So that board and batten system, again, we looked at how do we approach this to be more cost effective. We always had looked at the replacing the siding instead of repairing the siding. And I think as we've looked at it and analyzed it closer and looked at it again, I think there's a way that we could remove that siding, remove the battens that are over that siding. And by the way, the battens I don't think are I don't believe that they're new battens, or I believe they're new battens. I don't think they're original battens. I could be mistaken, but looking at them and the nails, the way they were applied, and they're only cut in 4-foot lengths, they could have been, had in full-length pieces, and they can be had in full-length pieces, and that's what we were proposing. But we also thought we would take the siding off, remove the siding, add the shear panel to the outside of the structure, put in a new vapor barrier system to have, so that you wouldn't have water intrusion into the building or moisture onto the structure, put in a copper flashing at the base that would allow the water to sheet away from the building and not gather around the core of the building between the top of the masonry rock wall and the siding that butts to the top of the rock wall. The water ponds there and sits there, and it goes back underneath and is impacting the mud sill or the plate, the wood plate that's there. So there's dry rot that's occurring there, and we thought that could be mitigated simply by adding a simple copper flashing that would allow the water to shed away from that wood structure to masonry structure. So when we removed the siding, our thought process was new battens, use the siding as much as we could. There is an epoxy system that's called out for by the original consultant to enhance the wood and increase the longevity and and it's a restoration system. It's a liquid wood product, wood epox, and we would simply flip the siding over, and then use the same siding and apply it back to the structure again. And if we did have to replace siding, we would use like for like. So dimensional species would be like for like. And I think there are some areas that we look at, and it's typically around the HVAC area where the HVAC units are located, where there's some severe rot, and it's rotted up 6 to 8 inches in some of those on some of those boards. And I think that those would simply be boards that we look at to be replaced. The rest of it, I believe that it could be done the way I've spoken about it, where it's removed, flipped over, cleaned up, primed, reprimed, and flipped over, and refaced and refinished on the outside, so that you're using the same material. The windows and doors, so I think that pretty much takes care of the core of the outside of the building, from the railroad ties to the board and batten siding. I do believe no matter how you look at it, you'd want to replace the battens. I don't believe that those were the original battens. I could be mistaken, but I don't believe they were. The way they're cut and the way that looks at it, it looks like they were new when it was removed, or when it was moved to its new location. The windows and doors were another issue that we approached 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we actually rehabilitated a window for a model, for a sample for, I believe, you people to look at, or your team at that time to look at and review, to look at the aesthetic, to look at how we approached it and how we did the work. We removed that window from the site, took it to our shop, replaced the stile and rails, reprimed it, repainted it, and put it back in. And to our knowledge, it looks as good, if not as better than the original. And it's just a matter of how we approach that again. Our approach would be the same way. We would remove door and window, whether it's be one at a time, two at a time, board up the area that we had removed it from, take it to our shop, rehabilitate that piece of wood, and that, whether it be stile rail, whether it be replacement, whether it be enhanced with epoxy, however it would be to maintain that same aesthetic would be our approach for that. Same thing with the doors. That's the same approach with doors. Rehabilitating the doors. Again, try to use as much material that's existing as possible. If it's completely gone, we replace like for like. Same dimensional material, same everything. That window was puttied in. We reputtied it back in with the like material. And I don't think you could tell the difference between that window that we replaced and rehabilitated and the windows that are currently there that are in decent shape. The interior fit and finish would be taken back to what it was inside. It has had some drywall repair. It has had different kinds of things that have been done to it over the years. So our approach would be using like-for-like materials again, going into it and replacing with like-for-like materials when we remove things. There was another element that was going to be done aesthetically just to conceal the air conditioning equipment from view, and we would use a similar cedar product, same dimension, put a top rail, bottom rail, and boards in between, and create the same kind of look, a little bit taller, so it's not as visible as it is right now. But that was the approach with that. That was something that Jim Chiaffi had originally done when we were working with Jim on this 4 years ago, and we kept that same element into our budget when we used the approach with Marcus and JR to say how do we keep that same aesthetic, how do we keep it looking the same, but yet replace the dilapidated railing that's out there currently right now, which was never original. That railing was put up, or that screen wall was put up to conceal the air conditioning units when they were installed. The structural system below on the floor, our consultant, or actually the city's consultant, but we recommended this fellow from a structural standpoint, came up with some poured in place concrete piers that would be, poured off-site, similar to what you see for mobile homes, similar to what you see for homes that are built of this stature in this older period of time, where we actually cast these support systems with a bracket, with a steel bracket off-site, bring them on and install them up underneath. To get underneath that building and try to pour these concrete piers, virtually impossible. So we'd be digging them out. So instead of the jacks that you see that are currently holding up the structure, which there's a couple of trailer jacks in there that are shown in some photographs, these become solid concrete piers that are used for supporting the structural system. And those were denoted on the structural plans prepared by RA Engineering. Yeah, you can look, you can see the jack, the mobile home jack that's up in the upper right-hand corner. That would be removed, and there would be a concrete pier there with a bracket that supports that beam. And I believe there's 27 of them. Are there 23 that support that are placed underneath that building. So we've tried to mitigate as much damage to the building as possible. Try to keep the aesthetic core of the building, bring the cost down substantially, and we're still committed to do the landscaping for no cost to the city. That was always a commitment that I had made personally 4 years ago. It still stands. And it also includes the area between the Village Green and the bookstore that's next door. That area we heard is kind of a no man's land, but I think it's owned by the city. And there was going to be a garden, a walk-through garden in that area that we were going to build, more of an arid garden, not necessarily cactus or anything like that would create problems for people in sticking them or anything like that, but more of an arid garden that becomes part of the core of the complex. So it's not just, it's a little bit of a walking adventure too as well. So you have a walk-through garden there that's conducive to all the desert plantings and plants. So I think that's really the core of it. Rick may have some more comment because he was a nuts and bolts guy on a lot of this in meetings, his meetings with subcontractors, his meetings with engineers on site. I wasn't always there. I wasn't present when he was. He took the core of this and ran with it once we did get the engineering plan done, and he also coordinated with Reza to do the as-built drawing for this, so this could be prepared for you. So I think Rick can comment if you need any other questions, or if you have questions of myself, we can definitely do as many answers as we can here. So that's what we're here for.
Thank you. Rick, would you like to add to the...
Summed it up pretty good, but if y'all want to review the structural drawings, just to see what the concept was versus the original concept. I have set them here.
I think that we are okay without having drawings. Okay, but thank you for that. Questions? Let's start with Dick, please.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank you for an amazing, in-depth report. This is really a very happy day that we're, finally getting someplace, and we really, really appreciate it. Very, very extensive report. My question really is just a matter of edification on the interiors. Talking about the floors, are the wood floors, the surface of the wood floors and the interior, are they enough intact, do you think? Do they need any extra work?
They seem to be intact. Now, there are 2 areas, if not 3 areas, where you have to open the floor to crawl in and gain access. So we would, again, use that material, go in and cut that material out and then put that material back in again. Same material. And if we had to replace a board, it would be like for like, again, size and dimension and like material. If we got into a situation where we'd have to replace it, because we have to gain access. There are 2 areas, and Rick can point out.
In the second bedroom.
In the dining room. We have to gain access underneath because we just can't get enough room in there to work and get these piers installed by crawling through the main crawl hole. So there would be some material and restoration that would go on there for the floors. But they do appear to be intact, and they, in my opinion, don't appear to be in bad shape.
They're on a level and up and down.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was in there, but that's what made me think.
Yeah.
And that'll level that off more, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And also with the bathroom, is that the same? You think that that's also in good condition? As you know, that's often where there's a lot of deterioration.
Yeah, but I don't think it's in bad condition per se. I mean, again, when we're looking at the restoration side of it, we can further analyze it a little bit closer. But I don't believe it has major inherent problems right now.
Right. And then you're using some synthetic material, of course, in doing this that's going to last longer, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
Our assumptions have been, if we can, the idea is if we can maintain that material that's on the outside core of the skin, which are the boards. The battens, I believe, honestly, I don't think there's anything in integrity-wise that needs to be salvaged, and we can come up with a nice batten, same dimension, and it's full-length batten, so you don't have these gaps.
Right.
And you wouldn't have those situations that would arise that would cause more problems for you with delaminating or coming apart or allowing moisture to penetrate through that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that the vapor barrier that we would use would be, a modernized vapor barrier. The copper flashing would be a soft copper flashing that could be molded to the rockwork that's on the outside and allow the water to sheet off of that little rock wall that's there. The mortar cap that's on the rock wall. It would allow the water to sheet away from the building. And that's the key thing, is the moisture that sits there and just gets reabsorbed back into the wood and just creates that dry rot situation.
Thank you so much again. Yeah.
Linda, please.
Thank you for this report. It's great.
No problem.
Great. My question is, will you be presenting the city with a maintenance plan for years to come? Because, people leave and sprinklers get changed and things aren't sealed.
We could do that, and really, it's going to get really down to the roof inspections and just working with the siding, the exterior of the building, and paints. So its surface finishes typically would allow you to maintain that building, maintain the integrity of that building once it's rehabilitated. So, yeah, we could put something together for you, and at least recommendations from the city staff of how they could maintain it, or how they should maintain it.
I think that's very important, if you have a 1-year or 3-year, whatever, a program for the city to follow.
Yeah, we know the roofer that did the installation for you out there of the fiber-tight roof and the shingles. And I think it'd be important for them to do they do biannual or biannual inspections twice a year, 3 times. You can do as many as you'd like, but typically once that fiber-tight's up and the shingles are on, it's just inspecting the flashings and counter flashings and sealants that have been applied. So the siding, again, it's just something, you use a material with good integrity. The desert's going to still burn it up. I mean, the heat, these south exposures and west exposures still are vicious on paint, but you have to maintain it, and it's proper maintenance. It's not just applying another coat the next year, or just putting another coat over cracked-in surfaces. It's prepping and reapplying. So I think it's important, but the materials we looked at were all top-of-the-line materials that we looked at for the surface finishes on the product.
And how long do you expect the restoration to take once you begin?
I'll let Rick comment.
4 months.
Yeah, we had 4 months.
months.
Yeah. It was proposed in a May start, to work May, June, July, August, and September is pretty much the turnover time, back into season again.
Vincent?
I want to commend ARG for doing an incredible report, especially knowing the language of preservation, that this in fact is a restoration, and the recommendations are really excellent in terms of how to approach the building. And I assume that you'll be following through with the construction end of the project.
The methods and means, I think, are going to be what Rick and I have discussed. The methods and means are somewhat, when we kind of looked at how we were going to do this. Originally, we looked at replacing all the siding, like for like size again, like for like material, like for like size. But then as we looked at it and said, okay, if you want to keep the integrity of what's there, let's do it. Let's see what we can do. And that gets down to the epoxies and gets down to the resins that are going to be used and applied, which ARG recommended.
Will they be overseeing work as it progresses?
I don't believe they're, again, that's something the city would have to comment on. I think we've done quite a few historical buildings in town, and we understand the integrity of this building. We understand the importance of this building. I think it's a methods and means and precautionary measures that we take on our side to ensure that we're doing the best that we possibly can. With oversight, I'm not sure how much more value that brings to you, but I think our understanding is, again, we approach this building to keep the integrity of it as best we can. Again, there's going to be compromises when we open up those walls, and inside those 4 rooms that we talked about, which is the dining, the vestibule of the main room, the bathroom, and open up those walls. We're going to have to look at how we restore that and put that back into back to the integrity of, like I said, like-for-like materials that are currently there.
And just so, if you didn't know, Dave Johnson basically has special expertise in these types of things. He's involved in the Andy Center.
El Mirador, the old Horwich Gallery. I mean, we've done a lot of restorations, single-family home restorations as well. Some historical homes in the area, quite a few historical homes. So we do understand it. We do understand the passion that you people have, and not just you, but the community. I mean, this is a community project, and we've always looked at it as a community project. And that's why we came in when we did come in to assist. This was 4 years ago, and it's a whole different plan. There was not an ARG report. There was some bids on the table that the city had solicited for repairing windows, doors, repairing siding, repairing a roof, and I believe a few other ancillary items, and they asked if there was a way we could help. I engaged Jim Chiaffi at that time and said, hey, this is a community project, how can we get in there and do this together? And Jim said, hey, I'll draw a plan for you. You guys figure out what you want to do, and let's make this happen. So that's how it all began, and now we're at this point. And, the numbers have ranged, from very high numbers like you've seen, and you could look at in this report, to a more palatable number, I think, for the city. And like I said again, the commitment still stands for us to give you a nice landscape plan that actually creates a walkable garden, it will enhance garden that will, I think, draw people to it. And surround the building with something that's a little more eye-appealing than just a bunch of grass and growing up against the building and growing up against the other building and mow marks and water point, shooting onto walls and things like that. We're conserving water, not only that, but we're also putting in a palette that's much more desert-friendly than lawn.
I commend the approach, and this is clearly, it's very rare to have a restoration project in the city, so this is clearly a very good example of how to carry through a restoration project with the principals knowing what they're dealing with and how to approach the building. So I commend you for your work.
Thank you.
Please.
Question, with respect to the proposed copper flashing that's going at the underside of the board and batten where it hits the top of the masonry cap,
Yes.
is that covering the top of the cap?
Our preference is to have it soft copper and cover the top of the cap. We could break it to where it, and then we could enhance the mud cap on the top to create more of a slope and just do a slight break. But, you know, we looked at it as a soft copper, and maybe from an aesthetic standpoint, overall, it may be more appealing to just have a slight break, increase the mud cap with a slope on the mud cap, and let the water sheet off and create the slight break.
Because that,
We're open to suggestion there.
okay, because that would be more in keeping, not having that new copper flashing completely cover the cap would be more in keeping what the original was.
That's not an issue.
mean,
We simply, if it's okay with what we're talking about here, we would enhance that mud cap, increase the pitch slightly to allow for water to sheet flow off of it and still have the break to protect. And we just let that break cap, let that metal break just slightly over the cap, over the new mud cap, and then water would flow off.
Right.
Should flow off. It will not flow backwards.
Right. And then has the council approved a budget for this?
We have presented, we presented Marcus with a budget. We've been going over back and forth and looking at how we can save more money and look at things of what we could do to save dollars. We are approaching Marcus with a revised budget within this week.
Yeah, the council.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem.
Dan? Okay.
My question was budget, so.
All right. Dave, you just mentioned a few minutes ago some of the projects that you've been involved in. Did you not also do the restoration of the Burnham Artist Colony,
Yes,
well known today as the Colony 29?
yes,
So you do absolutely have expertise in this area.
yes.
We talked about the length of the process, a May start date. I think the house is closed during those months anyway, so it won't impact the operating hours. I think it's closed for the summer. Okay, good. And you was just talked about the budget. Have you shared this plan with the Historical Society, those folks who actually live and work in the house?
We have shared with Steve Nichols and one other person. I cannot think of her name. Top of my head right now.
Jerry Vogelsang or Nicolette or Renee?
She does walks. She also does the
Oh,
walks.
yes, I know who you mean. She does the walks.
Can't think of her name, but we've shared.
Kathy.
Yes, Kathy.
Kathy Leonard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And mainly with Steve, because Steve was kind of, we had done work with Steve, and we had built homes for Steve. So we became intimately, involved with Steve, and that's kind of a little bit how we got involved in this too, because when they had the budget and the bids, we asked if we could meet with him and review those bids and maybe come up with a more palatable bid. And that's how we got engaged. So Steve was pretty much aware. Steve Nichols and Sally, his wife Sally, were pretty much aware of what we were doing. We had approached a couple times and talked about plans, talked about the aesthetic, talked about what we were going to do, but we have not shared the new RESA plan, the RA engineering plan, nor have we shared the philosophy with them again about flipping the boards and using as much as we could. Again, there may be, when we flip those boards over, we may have more dry rot, maybe more problematic to use, and maybe we have to, again, distress pieces of wood to look like the same pieces of wood. We've done this multiple times where we've copied pieces of wood that are virtually the same type of thing, and we've made them look exactly like what's, the adjacent piece of wood is, if we had to replace it. So it doesn't stand out like, oh, there's a new board, and all these other ones are, how many years old. So I think, again, we could approach them, the people that do work in there. We just haven't since Steve. And that Steve's, honestly, it's been probably a year and a half since I've really spoken to Steve about the approach.
Well, I'm sure they're going to be very pleased because
they were all excited. Yeah. They were all very excited. When Rick and I walked in the last time, they thought we were ready to start. And
they were going to move the chairs out.
Yeah, they were getting ready to move stuff out of the way for us. But they're excited about it. They don't want to see it happen. And there's a few people locals that hang around down there. And one guy came up to us one time and said, you know, how long it's been since he came and spoke at City Council and said, when is this going to happen? So I know there's excitement, and I know once it's done, it'll be a nice feature for the city. So we're excited about being part of that, to be honest with you.
Dave, thank you. Any other questions of Dave? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move to some discussion.
Okay.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Discussion, board. I'd like to, before I ask for a motion, I feel comfortable that this board is going to approve this as submitted. I'd like, again, because this is such a community effort and so many community members are involved, could there, during the restoration project, could the city perhaps put up a sign that the project is under, it's a renovation, it's a restoration? I'd like to have the project be, I'd like the public passing by, both locals and tourists, to see that the city is restoring this project. So some kind of appropriate signage. Jerry, you had a few more comments, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, this has been going on now for as long as the house has been sitting there and rotting, but really being looked at seriously over the last 5 years. And so I want to say that I've personally worked with Dave Johnston on the restoration of the A&D Center. And his work there was exemplary. And I don't have to tell you about the outcome because it's sitting there, and that restoration was magnificent. Of the many people that I've worked with in my own career in restoration, Dave's right up there at the top. And what I'm most astounded by is that he was able to bring this in a far more reasonable budget. The reason this has languished is simply because the original budgets weren't there for it, or the money wasn't there to do $1 million restoration. I also hated the original restoration because it was going to do more damage to the house than it was, than it was to fix it. And so we would be fixing a lot of the damage that we'd be making just to try to bring it back up to some sort of standard. So my goal in this is that we move forward. My goal is that we go ahead and start in May. I'd like to have it brought back to you next month for a public hearing and a formal action by you. And then I want to take it straight to council. Currently, I think we budgeted about we squirreled away out of the last budget around $350,000 for this project. I think we need to put away some more, but my goal will be to budget right away the balance of what Dave is suggesting here and go ahead and get started. And I think that's all, unless you have extra questions for me.
Question for you. Is there any way we could place a donation box in front of the restoration, donations to the project, 501c3, we could give them credits, tax credits. Even people who walk by and put $1 or $2, anything would help. Is there any way, or is there any reason we couldn't do that?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you reminded me of that, because we talked about that a while ago, and it was something that I wanted to do early on. Not only can we do that, we should do that, do a great photograph and just a brief explanation that the house is being restored and that we very much need the help. And what we can do is, for people who want to just throw change and dollars in there, that's fine. And then if people want to do more, we'll give them a way to do that, to get the tax, to get the write-off that they need to do that. So most definitely I'd want to do that as well.
Any questions? Jared, again, thank you for coming this morning, and thank you for spearheading this. We are at Dick said it well, this is a very happy day for certainly the HSPB, and I think the city of Palm Springs. And I truly, again, I just want to repeat how much I appreciate that this is a community effort, that Jim was involved in it, and Dave's involved in it, and you're involved in it, and so thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's had a long history, maybe a little too long, and it's time just to do it. So we'll be back to you next month for a formal action on this, on your public hearing. And next stop, La Plaza Theater.
All right, JR, thank you. From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, take care.
This requires no action from us today. This is just a,
No, it was just a report today, and next month we'll have it scheduled for action by the board.
okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you very, very much. All righty, so now we're moving 4B to 4A, is that correct?
Yes,
We're moving
please.
Ingleside Inn up, okay? So the next item under new business is 4B, move to 4A. Ingleside Inn Investors, SPE LLC, for approval of exterior alterations at the Carey Burge residence, also known as the Ingleside Inn, located at 200 West Ramon Road. This is case number 3.0685. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was brought to the board's attention actually by a member of the HSPB who observed some construction work going on at the site. Brought it to staff's attention. We followed up with the building department and found that they'd gotten a little bit ahead of themselves in terms of the review and approval processes for the work. The background on the Ingleside Inn is in your staff report. I'm not going to spend any time on that, but what I want to do is run right directly to page 6 of your report. There's two components to this project. It's primarily an accessibility repair project in which they've had to introduce some wider doors in some of the buildings and provide an accessible toilet facility for the restaurant that's there. So it's the accessibility entrances to, as I'm reading off of page 6 now, from rooms 138 and 139, removal of a non-required deteriorated stair at the west facade of the two-story building, and then conversion of room 8 to an accessible restaurant for the, accessible restroom for the restaurant. And then a new door into Villa 7, which would provide access for the first time from the front of the building rather than simply from its back patio. The new doors, patch stucco and so on, and light fixtures where there are some that are lost or missing would be done to match existing. And then accessibility improvements that were already done in which there was a removal or replacement of the two-piece clay tile roof tiles. The project also has a landscape component, which also was addressed here, and there are also executive summaries in the back of your packet. As this was discussed with the board also several months ago, in which there was a lot of blighted, dying, and overgrown material that was removed and replaced. But then there were some areas, as you can see in the photos, where particularly around the pool area, some of the arborvitae hedges and trees, they reduced some of the turf areas and removed old deteriorated asphalt pathways and replaced them with a stabilized decomposed granite. Also in the West Fountain Courtyard, it was a replacement of Italian cypress with skyrocket junipers and agave americana with agave siciliana that are considered to be more hardy. An individual from both the architect's office, which is the consulting architect for the scope of the work on the building, is here, Lance O'Donnell, as well as the landscape architect who has worked with the Ingleside Inn to put in place landscape plants that are reflective of the period of significance for this building. That concludes my staff report. We are recommending approval of this work. As noted, it is necessary for code-required accessibility. The landscape changes reduce the water consumption while retaining the secluded feeling of the site and respecting the courtyard areas to keep them reflective of their period of significance. And as noted on the summary of your project, the proposed renovations as shown do meet the guidelines for granting a certificate of approval by the HSPB and are consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic structures. That concludes my staff report. We are recommending approval of the project, and the applicant's representatives are in the audience if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, any questions of staff? Seeing none. Is the applicant going to do any form of presentation, or do we have questions of the applicant?
They're available if you have any questions.
Well, this has been a exciting project, of course. I think everyone's very happy to see the Ingleside Inn having some new, fresh blood, and a lot of good things are being done there. I'll accept a motion.
Move that we accept the report as is.
Second.
right, so we have a first from Todd and a second from Ms. Dixon. Any discussion? I just had one question. I don't think this falls under our purview, but there was a new structure added to the pool area.
We've identified that with the owner and applicant, and that's going to need to be permitted. It currently is not part of any of the scope of the permits that the building department has on file. And if that is something that they wish to move forward with in terms of legalizing it under a building permit, it would need to come back to you also.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have one question. Did they not realize that these changes should come to this commission? I mean, I guess I'm curious as to why it's after the fact.
When one of the board members first brought this to our attention at a staff level, we reached out to the owner's representative and asked them to clarify what the scope was. At that time, we were told that it was accessibility upgrades for a few doors at the back of the building, and that it was some replacement of some overgrown hedges. And as we learned when we were on the site, the work actually is a little bit more than what they had initially characterized. So we had heard it as being minor and insignificant, almost at the level of maintenance. Once we did go out and look at it, we realized it was more. And we made the applicant and the owners aware of that.
Lance, do you have something to add? Good morning, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, Lance O'Donnell, O2 Architecture. Yeah, thank you for the care and attention to this project. I think as we, each one of you see these projects come before this board, and there are many facets of deferred maintenance that as you get into it, you realize that if there is a rainstorm or if there's a windstorm or if there's something going on, we need to address this thing immediately. So getting a little bit ahead of ourselves was just identifying those things that were either life safety issues or would cause more damage had they gone, kind of the traditional route of, let's get a bunch of eyes on this. So while we are here and we are adhering to the Secretary of Interior standards and all good construction for durability, it was never our intent to kind of take on scopes of work that weren't reviewed by this board or by the city. So it's just, as you get into these things, you just discover things that become life safety issues. And so you got to address those right away.
Lance, I know that there was a fire recently, apparently a palm tree fire ignited an auxiliary building. Can you tell us a little bit about what the future of that portion of the property?
Yeah, thankfully it was back of house area where, behind the restaurant, behind where the rubbish collection and things are. So that area is being cleaned up, and that just kind of accelerated a couple things for us. So while it didn't really affect anything of historic significance, it was probably in the best area that it could have been in. So, yeah, there's really no concern on our part that we lost anything of value.
Any other questions for Lance at this time? All right, thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
So we have a first and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Marsh is opposed. All right. Vincent, no comment? No comment? Please.
Work has occurred. We're reviewing this after the fact, but the submittal does show existing conditions and proposed conditions, and there's also in language in the staff report that talks about how windows and doors would be substantially similar to that which exists, i.e. the glass and wood frame doors and windows, and basically changing out some of that to meet the current needs and accommodations. However, there's since it's already done, it would seem like there should be pictures or examples of what the new replacement material is. There's no evidence of how the doors or the windows meet the Secretary of Interior standards, which say that you should not copy what existing conditions are, but rather show in a substantially similar way a new door, a new window. So in terms of historicity, I don't know what will be original material or what is new material. So I'm kind of concerned in terms of, does this really meet the standards in terms of rehabilitation?
Okay. All right. I respect your opposed vote. No further discussion. We called the vote. Is it 4-1 then?
5-1.
5-1. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Board. Next item on our agenda is indeed 4A, which is now 4B. This is Justin Kerr and Maurice Skinful, owners, for approval of a renovation and addition to a single-family residence located at 401 West Morito Place, a Class 1 historic site, case 3.4001. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in your staff report, and you may recall, this matter and project and address was before you back in January for a certificate of approval to demolish the property, which you placed a hold and processed it through designation for Class 1 status, which the City Council granted on May 17th. The current owner is a new owner who bought the property from the previous owner and has submitted now the project that's before you. As noted in the summary, it's a proposal to restore the exterior of the original portion of the English Tudor Revival cottage, demolishing existing portions of the non-contributing additions that were built in the 1980s, reconstructing portions of an existing two-story addition on the rear of the existing cottage in a contrasting architectural style, and installing new landscaping, a swimming pool, pool terrace, and a steel shade structure behind the existing cottage. I want to just summarize the recommendation here. I'll come back to that in a minute, but we're basically making a recommendation for approval with a couple of additional conditions, that being, one, to reinstall the shake siding that was shown in the 1960 vintage photo in the upper part of the gable. Two, to use windows on the west facade of the original home that are consistent in material and design to the other original windows found in that part of the structure, rather than the aluminum-clad casement windows that have no muntins that are currently proposed. And to carefully consider the use of wood in areas of the project exposed to direct sun, because even cedar and ipe, a very dense hardwood species, are vulnerable to rapid deterioration from the exposure to the sun and heat here in the desert, and to consider simulated wood products such as a porcelain plank or proprietary products such as hardy board as an alternative that is more durable but reflects the same material appearance. The background for the project is provided then for you on the following pages of the staff report, and the analysis of the project against the guidelines for considering a certificate of approval are identified in your staff report on pages 5 through 8. On page 6 of your staff report, there is an image there that I provided for you from the ARG staff report, or Historic Resources report, that was prepared for your consideration earlier this year. And there you can see the existing current conditions in the gable, and then the conditions that were evidenced in 1960 when a photograph was taken relative to a fire that occurred in the house. So in conclusion, we believe that the proposed renovation that is being proposed here enhances the existing historic resource by removing the non-contributing portions and allowing an addition that brings the project and the home up to contemporary living standards. The modifications to restore and repair the existing historic structure improve its overall historic integrity, particularly with the appearance of the materials and the scale that that structure originally had. And the proposed renovations do meet the guidelines for granting a certificate of approval by the HSPB and are deemed consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic structures. Both the homeowner and the consulting architect for this project are in the audience and are available to either make a presentation if you would like, or to answer any questions you may have, and we're available to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Any questions for staff? All right, I'd like the applicant to come forward, please. I think we might have some questions. Good morning, welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Justin Kerr. I am the proud owner of 401 Burrito Place.
I'm certainly liking what I'm seeing. Without reading it word for word, how much square footage are you adding to the house?
If it's okay, can I defer to the architect, Christy,
Please.
who's
No,
joined
and
me?
we have an extra
come down.
seat this morning. Welcome, good morning, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Christy Azevedo.
I think you have your own microphone right there. Just turn that. Thanks, Dan.
Hi, Christy Azevedo. You know what, I don't actually know the breakdown per square footage because it's more of like an overall concept of being similar, probably like 410. You actually have like broken this down a million times. Just basically we're less of a presence and more about the yard and just letting the Tudor kind of shine in the front.
Okay. In the one photograph or the one drawing that I've seen, it is a very modern structure coming off the second floor, facing sort of southwest, with a large window. So this is a very contemporary treatment, fine with.
Yes. I think the intention from the beginning, we bought this property knowing it was a historical property, and so the idea was absolutely to honor that and highlight that. And so one of the key decisions we made early on was understanding that the pitched roof is very much iconic to this property, and some of the add-ons in the 80s mimicked different angles and different roof lines off of the original pitch. And what we did on the second floor, which you're referring to, is we very purposely created a contemporary look which complemented it, but made it clear that this is the new portion of the house versus the original old. And so that's why you see the horizontal roof playing against the pitch of the original building. And so that was the point of view around building that part.
Any questions? I think Dan first, please.
I just have a statement. This is very near and dear to my heart. And I think it's beautiful. And I love the fact that it's contemporary with the old, but the materials work together. It's kept back on the site. So from the front, there were no garages pulled forward on the property. So it will look very much like it looks now. And all this stuff is in the back. And it's not derivative of trying to be a faux Tudor, which was my concern from the beginning on this. And I'm very pleased.
Thank you, Dan. Todd?
I am also very pleased. So thank you. When this came before us to rescue and save, it was so. The attempt was to, basically salvageable, and it had to be torn down, and there was no other choice. And I think all of it was another choice, another option. You proved that. So thank you. The only question I have is the part that's being torn down that's similar to the existing house. Who confirmed that what's being torn down was indeed not original?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. How
There's part of the existing structure is being demolished, but it's purported that part that's being demolished is not original, that it was an addition. How is it confirmed that what's being demolished was indeed an addition and not the original part of the structure?
Actually, the original garage is coming away. Oh, thanks. The original garage is coming away. So it's not that the entire, this is as much and the most predominantly striking aspects of the house. We're focusing on and restoring those. There's so many additions and everything. It kind of buried some of the original stuff, but it was kind of interesting. I do think that they incorporated it in the 80s and turned it into like living space, but there was a garage original to the house on the west side, sort of set back. And there's no like photo documentation, but you can tell by the architecture the way it is now that was true. So basically that got encased. They put a second floor on it. They put a bay window on it. And they did a couple other things to it. So it just seemed more prudent to remove that section, put a very simple carport right there, and highlight the majority of the Tudor.
So I guess in particular, I'm looking at your page number A104 that has the shaded parts of existing versus being,
Oh, so you know what? That's the existing things. Yeah, so that shows what is going away.
Right.
And so to your point, on the north elevation number 1, that little bit with the bay window there is the original garage.
So our understanding was if, on the previous image, there was a long shoebox shape which kind of came off the side, which was that shoebox off of the corner here.
Exactly, yeah.
This was original, in the context of it was a very small garage and very small shape, and then was kind of updated and added the bay window and was turned into an interior living room space, which at this point kind of was lost amongst all of the other remodels. And so it was impractical in terms of contemporary living to have that. You can't even fit a car inside of that space any longer.
Member Hayes, I believe that information is confirmed in the historic resource report that you all reviewed when this was designated.
So go back to A104, Ken, thanks. So on that upper drawing, 1, you are removing part of the original structure of the house.
Yes, as it relates to that portion which we carriage garage area.
And why, yeah, where that bay.
Original garage to be removed.
Right, so why couldn't you save that portion?
To be, well,
Go ahead.
no, all I was going to say is it's been so refurbished as a part
Yeah.
of the addition of the 80s. It's more an experience of all of this original addition from the 80s was incorporated into this, so that it was hard to find any of the original.
Well, so, but that part, that lower, the lower drawing there is on the back of the house, correct?
Correct.
That's on the
So
other side of the house, yes.
It's on the back side, it's on the south side of the house. So and that's all 80s edition. I don't
Yes.
have a problem with taking that out.
Yeah.
That upper drawing, where you're removing part of the original structure, you're changing the front facade of the building. That's always been part of the front facade of the building. And so that would be my objection to removing that portion. I myself, I don't know that I necessarily want to see you turn that back into a garage, but we have an intact original structure there. And so I don't quite see the reason for taking it off. I mean, Ken?
I just want to call your attention in the HRG report, and I think in one of the slides I have here, there's 2 things that you can see. First of all, note the angle of the roof in this particular picture from 1960. The original home did have a shed roof that came off from the main gable, and that is part of what's being proposed to be removed, but again, it's on the back side of the house. But the second thing I would call your attention to is this drawing. And it's particularly notable that if you compare the way these 2 images are laid side by side, what we believe is the original garage, which you see in that lower left corner of the leftmost slide, is actually behind this appendage that has the bay windows in the front. So I'm going to step up to the slide a minute and explain what I'm trying to show you. But my point is that that portion which they're proposing to remove is not part of the original structure.
I can see that.
So when you look at this area here and you consider where this dimension is here relative to here, you can see that the original front of whatever this structure was, we believe it to be a garage, was actually in here. And so in discussions with Christine, we've talked about what this is. This we do not believe is part of the original 1928 structure, but rather this is some of the remodeling that was done in the 1980s and stuck on the front of what was the original garage back here.
A better answer.
Looking like a pro.
So staff is certain that that part that they're removing is not part of the original structure?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
Dick, please.
Again, I think this is going to be another amazing day for us. We don't always get a homeowner and an architect who really understand how important this house is. You do have a jewel, for certain. Definitely one of a kind. I have a couple questions. One is, because it's a defining historic feature, I have not, maybe I missed it. I did not see any reference as to the rock perimeter wall on the east property line as far as it's being, did I miss that? Or?
Oh, you were going to say it's not on your property.
We love that wall. It's very nice. There is some debate whether it actually is on our property or not. We need to get a surveyor to kind of final validate that. The intention is to keep that wall and honor that wall. Currently off of that wall is an extension of a chain link fence. So I think that we would try and find the right way to acknowledge it and then make that more aesthetically pleasing. But we honor that and would want to figure out the best way to figure out what to do if it is on our property or not. When we purchased it, we were told it was not on our property.
Really?
By the owner.
And can I respond to that? The Hoovers own it. They claim that they own it. That's the neighbor.
A neighbor?
Yes.
Very interesting.
And so.
Yeah. I get it.
But they don't want to tear it down either, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. All right, okay, good.
I'd recommend the survey.
Okay, yes, that is a part of our plan.
The very interesting floor plan, what you did with the floor plan, particularly on the first, in the original part of the house when you first come in, what you're doing with it. After going into the home when we did our site visit, I've been toying around in my mind, how would I deal with this? So it's very interesting. Yeah. You did relocate the front door. I think, right? I didn't have a problem with that, but you did relocate the front door. Makes more sense with what you're doing as far as the overall floor plan. Correct. Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you so much.
Linda?
I would just like to say thank you for purchasing it. Because like Todd said, we all felt that there was so much there and we didn't want to see it just disappear. Hope you'll invite us to see the new improvements.
Of course.
Vincent?
I also would want to commend you because I hope that you went into the project knowing that this was an historic building that was threatened and that in the disclosure and the purchase and sale, that it was your intent to obviously save the structure on the site. And so what's resulting is a good rehabilitation of a rare building in Palm Springs, a Tudor revival building that the case report says may be the only one here. So it reaches a level of exceptional significance in terms of Palm Springs. And I commend you, the ownership, and the architect for doing a good job in presenting a plan that is acceptable, that is takes into acknowledges basically an historic building and how to approach an historic building and how to do a good rehabilitation. So we all thank you for the project.
Great, thanks.
Ken, now that a new addition is being put on this home, of course, no, please, educate me. Does the new addition, the second floor addition, the carport, all of this extra square footage, does it benefit from Class 1 historic status?
Well, yes. The property, as you know, it's the site relative to the assessor parcel number that has eligibility for the placement of a Mills Act contract on the property. So the answer is yes.
So the current building has Class 1 historic status.
Current site.
Yes, the site, thank you, the site. And some changes are being done to the site, the relocation of the front door. That does not alter the status of the property?
No, keep in mind that a Mills Act, the criteria for being eligible for a Mills Act is that the home or the site is identified and listed on a local register of historic resources, which it is. So over time, modifications to that historic resource can occur without adversely affecting the Mills Act contract unless the scope of the work begins to materially impair that's the term out of CEQA, to materially impair the historic resource such that it no longer conveys its historic significance. And by going through the process that you do here today, with each time that a Class 1 site is modified, you're assuring that the modifications that are being done are not damaging that historic resource. So the very process that you're going through at this moment is part of what assures that the integrity of the resource is not compromised.
Excellent. Well, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thank you both very much for coming. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. I just like to add one thing. I'd like
Please.
to particularly thank Ken for his guidance through the process. We purchased it 6 months ago knowing that we wanted to honor the historic integrity of the building, and Ken has been a fantastic resource in guiding us through that. We were originally hoping to present in November, but took the extra months to make sure everything was ticked and tied, and so we appreciate it. We look forward to having you all over, and thank you for your time.
We appreciate Ken also.
Thank you.
You have a San Francisco architect. Are you originally from San Francisco?
I'm originally, my roots, as it's relevant to this conversation, I'm originally from Newport Beach and have come to Palm Springs every year since my 6th birthday. I spent my honeymoon here, and my wife and I have spent the last 10 years coming 6 to 10 times a year, and so we're excited to put down some area. We have lived in San Francisco for the last 20 years, my wife and I. We've actually worked on some historic projects with our architect, Christy, in San Francisco, and my wife and I now live in New York City. We're a little bit all over, but we're getting closer to calling Palm Springs home.
Very nice.
Great.
Anyone else? Please.
You know, it's not required and it's not shown on the plans, but we're pretty excited that switching the door or whatever almost like leaves that original block of the house the way it is, like so that front room can retain what it is. It will have all the original windows, the original fireplace, the original beams, you know. So it's not modern at all. So it really, there is more of a contrast even than you realize. And upstairs, the east side bedroom too is exactly as it is. So, you know, we're changing things and making it much more usable for the clients, but there is a lot of stuff inside and out that's going to be there. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Board, any discussion? Linda, go.
Okay. Move to approve the renovation and addition as presented in the staff report.
And Burkett is the second? So we have our first and a second. Any further discussion on this? I'd just like also to commend staff and the applicant and the architect. I think you can see from the approval of the board that we're very pleased with this. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
Let this set an example for other folks. Please. Yeah. Oh, no.
Gary, can I just say one thing?
Please, Dan.
Very interesting. I think that we can really build on this project, especially in Old Las Palmas, as a fine example of what can be done. Just over the holidays, as I was meeting people, I was talking about historic preservation, actually. And there are going to be 2 major houses that are going to apply for Class 1 because of just our basic conversation and understanding. And I think that with this project, as well as taking a very grassroots approach to this, we've got a chance to really save some of the great properties of Old Las Palmas. And I'm really happy to have this one done today. Thank you.
Well, and Dan, on that note, the property that we learned about this morning during public comment that Mr. Nelson brought forward, that we looked at photographs, had those folks been aware that maybe they didn't have to do as much of the demolition on that property as they did, that they could have maintained the home and still incorporated modern and contemporary additions and changes to it? So yes, I hope that this does set an example. I hope that this helps further educate certainly your neighborhood and other homes in your neighborhood, because it's a shame about what we saw earlier today, but unfortunately not much we can do on that. Dick?
Yes. I'd just like to, I was going to wait till board comments, but I was sitting here thinking, this is a great opportunity. I don't know if we could get Amy involved, but, things that like happen today, when you think about the Cornelia White House and you think about this new house on Morita, as examples to get out into the community, there just has to be a way of taking this opportunity to really highlight, we no longer, since Skip is gone, we don't quite have that conduit that we once had to the paper as an example. But maybe through Amy Bladesdell, I just think this is an opportunity to get some really PR in this town. And maybe one PS, I can get something to Denise, but I'd just like for us to think about that a little bit, because it's these benchmarks that will make a difference, and particularly getting it out into the real estate community as well, but in a nice way, and really taking advantage of the opportunity. So I'd like for us to kick that around a little bit and see if we could come up with some brainstorming ideas on really capitalizing on this.
So can I just jump in there? And I know
Please.
it's more of a comments part, but so I can't agree more, and I think it's really, sad and perhaps an opportunity that the Via Lola discussion came up at the same time this came up. I went through the Via Lola property when it was on the market, and I brought it up, and it was stunning. And I have to say, in my humble opinion, the part that they tore down was the nicest part of the house. And the part that they left, why they left what they left and tore down what they tore down, I have no clue. But the sad thing is, the similarity between these two structures is astounding. You had a relatively sort of what looked to be an ugly addition on the back that's apparently still standing, and this stunning original main entry living room portion. And the people who saved their home and brought it before us the correct way, as Gary asked and Ken answered, are potentially going to be rewarded, or could possibly be rewarded by substantial tax savings on the entire renovated property. That's going to be worth a lot of money and save them thousands of dollars annually in taxes. Had the other party on Via Lola done the exact same thing, the city would still be having a wonderful resource, but those current property owners that the store destroyed this existing house could also have reaped those rewards, whatever that word is, reaped of Mills Act. But when you look at the two properties, it's astounding how similar they were at one point, and it's just sad what happened. And I'm not sure, what can be done in the future with respect to, permitting and trying to avoid what happened at the Via
Todd, those words were perfect. I think you should write an editorial to the Desert Sun, and you should compare those two properties with exactly what you said. I mean, really, you said it perfectly.
Well, and on that note, I just actually wrote myself a note here, and so I would encourage you, perhaps a letter to the editor of the Desert Sun, just recapping what you just said, and then making a comment that certainly since Skip Descant's departure from the Desert Sun, there has been no reporting in this room of any HSPB activities. I think that's a shortcoming from our local paper. Skip often sat here, often reported in great detail projects that were before us, the actions this board took, and it was one way of presenting news to the locals, and we don't have that again. So do you accept this? Okay, wonderful. All right, thank you.
Oh,
Dick, please.
One more thing. I just had a thought about taking that also another step with Todd. You know how Renee Brown and Tracy do the thing in the paper about every 2 weeks
Thanks
or
for
so?
the memories.
Here's a great opportunity that maybe we could introduce some sort of a, similar kind of concept, but showing examples. I think it's all about showing examples. That's what's important. And it's nothing like the visual. And the text is great, but the visuals are what really do make an impact, the before and the after. And maybe that's what we could do. Maybe we could really have maybe not every other week, but maybe once a month or once every 2 months, but something that, and I don't know how one goes about working that out with the paper, how that works. But I just think we just got to do something. This is what's going to highlight everything that we stand for. It's important.
Mr. Chair, we're
Please.
veering away from the agenda. We
We
need
are.
to stick
We
to
are.
the items that are scheduled on the agenda.
We're back.
Okay.
We're back. All righty, so thank you. That completes item 4A and 4B under new business. We are now at item 5 on our agenda. These are the discussions. 5A, update 2018 National Preservation Month Symposium. Dick, please.
Okay. The main thing I'd like to highlight on the report today is on number 2, and that's we've been talking about this in the last several meetings, but it's the extension of the event on April 14th has been confirmed by the Office of Historic Preservation for the state of California for their workshop. It's a all-day workshop that'll include Southern California communities as well. Vincent has been coordinating this with the OHPs and with our staff here as the liaison. We'll be discussing already have been discussing the topics that will be included for that program. And also, I know Vincent reached out to Todd Hayes on just this part of the event, but just as a side note, that Vincent will be the liaison to our subcommittee so we don't violate the Brown Act. So, the way that we see this working is that there would be a link on the Palm Springs registration event registration site for all interested attendees who might like to go to the OHAP, but they would be a link that would go to their site so that they handle the registration. I was able to speak with Dave just a few minutes yesterday about the website and the registration. If we can do the symposium, people sign up for the symposium on Sunday, the tour selection, and the after event, and then there'd just be a link after that that would, if they would like to go to the Saturday event, because it's really more about more serious preservation-oriented folks than what we draw in the larger community of the residents. So it's not going to, I mean, it's so specific and it's much more in-depth than what that the bulk of probably of our audience really cares about. But I think this really will bolster our event immensely, and I think it's really great that working with us we've been trying to get this to happen for the last couple of years. So I'll just throw out there and see if anybody has any questions or any comments about that. We'll be having another subcommittee meeting here very shortly. On the
Calendar.
15th.
It's on the 15th, okay.
Questions of Dick?
Okay, good.
Any further?
That's it. That's my
Okay,
report.
all right, thank you very much, Dick. 5B, discussions, the Cornelia White House, we've just completed that earlier. The Francis Stevens School and Park landscape.
And if I may, we're going to lose Franco, so could we
Yes,
bring
please.
up the fire station number 1? He'll give you a brief update, and then
Yes.
we'll jump back onto
Yes,
agenda.
no, absolutely, thank you, Ken. Franco, I saw you sitting back there, please.
Morning, Chair, board members. Fire Station 1 gate replacement. The Engineering Services Department is working with the Fire Department involving the installation of a solar-powered gate operator. Currently at the site, fire crew needs to get out of their rig to open the gate, close the gate, etc. The installation of the solar-powered gator operator, we've been looking at various manufacturers, and we're in the process of obtaining cut sheets, which actually identifies the dimension of the photovoltaic panels. It also identifies the dimensions of the battery backup cabinet and the controller unit to operate the gate operator. With the installation of this new gate operator, you will see a gooseneck keypad. We'll have buttons. There'll be some detector loops on the bottom, both in the ingress and the egress side of the gate. This altogether is going to alleviate the need of fire crew getting out of their rig, backing up traffic on Indian. But what we would like to do in addition to that is deal with an issue that we've had at the site. Transient issue, homeless are hopping over the gate. So while we're looking at this gate operator, we've also taken a look at replacing the existing gate on that south side. It's about 172 feet of linear gate with a wrought iron 7-foot picket gate, and hopefully that'll address the issue that we're having there. We're right now at the moment just fact-finding. I'm trying to obtain all those necessary drawings and hopefully return in February and provide you an update.
Franco, there's some visible damage to the front of the building, to the right side. It just looks like somebody backed into it and broke some block. Is that being addressed at any time?
Not with this project. I wasn't aware of that.
Questions for Franco? All right, thank you, and thanks for hanging out with us this morning. Now, number 2, Francis Stevens School and Park Landscape. Flynn.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, I had hoped to be further along in this project than we are, but unfortunately, we just got the proposal back from Steve Kalon yesterday on doing the historic study of the landscape materials there at the school. So we'll go ahead and sign a contract with him, have him prepare his report, and then we'll forward that to the landscape architect to assist them in doing the master plan for the school. One of the other things that you had requested that we do last month was forward this to the AAC for their comments. And so I provided the draft minutes there. I'll just go over some of their recommendations very quickly. In terms of the list of plant materials, they thought the plant materials were generally appropriate for the site with the exception of the hibiscus. They felt that that was inappropriate for the site. They also recommended adding verbena, which has been there historically according to one of the members, and natal plum to the list of plant materials. And then again, Mr. Kalon's study will show if there's anything else that should be considered as part of that. They also recommended focusing the city's immediate budget on one specific area, looking at the 3 sides where they're replacing the buffers. They recommended looking at just one of those areas, focusing the efforts there, and then hitting the other areas as more funds become available. They also recommended that in terms of the landscape design, that each of the frontage areas has a different character or a different approach. For example, Palm Canyon tends to be more urban and more pedestrian in nature versus Indian Canyon, which is more auto-oriented in nature. And they thought that the landscape plan should address the different characteristics of each of the different sides of the site. In high-traffic areas, they had a concern with the materials that were proposed or had been installed on Palm Canyon. Just because of people getting in and out of cars, they're adjacent to the curb. There was a lot of foot traffic through those buffer areas, and so they recommended something more durable, either pavers or artificial turf, and so we'll forward that comment on. Even though you didn't ask them to do this, they did have a comment about the DG materials, the decomposed granite. They also felt that the red was a little bit too much, shall we say, and wanted something that was more neutral in its color and appearance. And then finally, because we made the mistake of taking the landscape to them now, they also want to see the final master plan. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Their review is not required, but it might be helpful to you all when we bring the master plan back to you to also have comments of the AAC, since they do have trained landscape architects on the committee. So those were their comments, and again, we'll forward those and any others you might have to the landscape architect along with the historic study that Mr. Kalon is completing for us.
Excellent. Any questions of Flynn?
So if the board agrees with what goes back to AAC, and I welcome that, that's great, but that'll be done before it comes back to us?
It could be done either way. Either you could have them review the master plan before it comes back to you so you have their comments, or else you might want to look at it first and then send it to them for final. Either way works.
Because we ultimately have the final, don't we?
Exactly.
So it might be more helpful if they saw it first, and we could maybe incorporate their thoughts before.
I think we're in agreement on that. We should have the final.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That completes Francis Stevens School and Park Landscape. La Plaza Theater Adaptive Reuse, is that going to be for the next month now?
That was what Councilmember Roberts mentioned. They
Yes.
would have more to bring back next month.
Okay, excellent. And we just finished Fire Station number 1, the gate replacement. So that completes item 5, discussions on our agenda. Board member comments. I'd like to come back to the discussion that we got a little off track on a little earlier, and this specifically is 216 via Lola. Again, this is just discussion. We know that the city has a historic resources survey. Is that still in its draft form? What is the status of our new historic resource survey?
It is still in its draft form. There was another component that I had been requested to add, and that was specific to the Desert Highlands Gateway neighborhood. I felt that we probably should have included that earlier and didn't, so I had HRG do an addendum to that. I need to bring that element back to you all to see that before we take the entire thing to City Council. So that's really the only thing that stands out from taking it forward to City Council for their approval.
Okay. And then knowing that the building department does have an existing list of properties that do red flag certain properties for review. And how, listen, we're frustrated, I think, that something like the Via Lola property is under demolition right now. For whatever definition you want to use, it has been demolished. Todd's eyes on the property, and I respect you, and for him to assess that the best parts of the house have been eliminated. I think that we want to do something. We want to do something to have our city have a little more teeth in somebody coming to the building department and pulling a remodeling permit and submitting a plan, and somebody in the planning, not planning department, I'm sorry, in the building department looking at the extent of this remodeling, knowing the year of the property, knowing that it's on the Historic Resources Survey. It doesn't now, but I think what we're looking for is a trigger, something that would trigger the building department to say, just a second, this might be too much demolition on this particular property or something. So you've been very helpful with us the last several years in writing letters to the council, in bringing our hopes and desires and our review to the council. What can we do here, Flynn?
I have a very simple answer, and you're not going to like it.
Oh, then tell Todd.
The answer is you already have a historic preservation ordinance in place. The best way to guide remodeling of historic properties is to designate them historic to begin with. If there are properties that you think are significant that aren't designated, we have money every year to do historic resource reports and to take them through the process. So we need to identify which ones and put them on your work plan and do that first. I cannot tell you how important it is. Designate the property first so that when there are any changes, it automatically comes to HSPB. That is the best way. And I'm going to muddle a sports metaphor. The best defense is a good offense. And your historic preservation ordinance is your best offense of all.
And Flynn, thank you for reminding us of that. Vincent.
My question would be, the proposed citywide survey, is there anything in the databases of the city, in particular the building department, that shows that each and every building in the surveys are potential historic resources, so that, I mean, I know you can't officially until the city council adopts it, put that on the building department side and citywide. The building department needs to know what are potential historic resources. Is there any recordation in your databases that shows that there are potential resources out there that have not yet been adopted? Well, I guess I am. I'm thinking San Francisco.
And the short answer, you answered your own question, is that once that document becomes formally adopted by the city council, we can begin to take that document and plug it into the other databases around the city that have building and development aspects to them. The second thing I would tell you is that those properties that were in the 2004 survey were red tagged as a red screen that comes up when you pull up that particular property in one of the older databases. To the best of my knowledge, that red tagging has been migrated over to the building department's database. It's called Blueprints, P-R-I-N-C-E, and the old database is called WinBase, and it is no longer supported. The other departments don't use it, and yet it's vitally important to us in planning because it's got all kinds of historic stuff in it. So we do have the 2004 Historic Resource Survey properties red tagged. I can confirm that they were migrated over to Blueprints. I believe they were about 5 years ago. Once the new survey is adopted by City Council, we can then begin to migrate that stuff in and put tags into their system as well.
You cannot, until the City Council adopts it, it cannot be put on the system?
Well, what I'm saying is until it's a formal document, we really only have a draft. So they have information that, pertaining to it. The only ones that are actually in their database, though, are those sites from the 2004 survey. So as soon as we can get this survey adopted by City Council, we can get all these new projects dropped into it. They have the same access to that database you do. The issue is one of when a building permit application comes in, how do we make that automatically come up? And that's something I think we're still going to have to work with them on.
It's live on your website, correct? The citywide survey.
Yes.
Does that translate into building officials looking up properties when a building permit
No.
comes in?
No. That's our challenge right now.
Yikes.
That's our challenge right now.
If I could make one comment, this comes back to something that we go over and over again. We see things when there's a request for a demolition permit. In this case, there was not a demolition permit. And so, and then we get back to the other point of if a demolition permit comes in, our only weapon is to make it a Class 1. And so some of the properties that are becoming Class 1s, I don't really think necessarily should be. And, you know, but that's where our hands are tied. It's black or white, one or the other. And there should be some other way to be able to save properties and make them have adaptive reuse, as we talked about, without making them Class 1. It's too black or white. It's too extreme. And, you know, as far as realtors are concerned, Gary, I thought, you know, you confident that the realtor that sold this house on Via Lola was a historian and had talked to the people, and so that they were sort of on board with it. And so it's very surprising that this happens. Now, and I don't know how else to do this. I mean, I walk by that house all the time, and I saw this being torn down. But I just thought there were permits, whatever. You know, there was nothing posted, no way to know, no contractors' phone numbers or anything posted on the site to even check. And so one morning the house was there, the next morning the main house was gone. And I would have had no trouble calling the contractor to find out what was going on. You know, again, a grassroots kind of thing. And I don't have the solution to the problem. That's my frustration and all of our frustration. I'm only bringing out in this one specific example, we might have been able to do something.
Here's an idea. In reviewing our minutes for our 2018 work plan, we did identify the Tennis Club Neighborhood Historic District, along with the Araby Rock Houses, the Las Palmas Liquor Store, and the 606 Oleander Building. I think what we're aware of today is that, in my view, number 2, number 3, and number 4 on here, there is no threat to any of those particular properties, but we are seeing an ongoing threat in one of our high-priced, highly regarded and respected residential neighborhoods, the Las Palmas neighborhood. Perhaps we look at doing a Las Palmas historic district. We have the Las Palmas Business District. If we designated Las Palmas as a historic district, then it would take certainly some of the pressure off of us finding things after the fact, because then anything would have to come before.
Maybe, Mr. Chair, what we might do is just an informational item on your February agenda about the process for designating historic districts. I don't know that we've done that recently, and I think it might be helpful to go through the steps that are necessary for that. And so that might be a good informational item for your February agenda.
But we've already enacted the tennis club, that project, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd just like some feedback from the board, whether that's something that, I think we do need a little bit refresher, I certainly do, on historic districts and the process and what it means in a historic district. But to me, it sounds like this might be a way to protect some of those homes, because Dan, certainly you know the neighborhood better than most. We know that there are other similar homes to the Via Lola house in there, that as 401 Morito sets an example today, so does 216 Via Lola. Now the person across the street from 216 via Lola says, oh, gee, they tore down half that house. I think I'll do the same. And there is no stop-gap measure on that. So need some additional feedback here.
It only makes sense to do that when you think about it. It's the same concept that we decided to do the tennis district. I have a question as to, is there a definition of what renovation is and what demo is?
There is a definition in the Historic Preservation Ordinance on what demo is, which is reflective of what the definition of a demolition is in the California Building Code. So the definition of a demolition is there. A renovation is not so clearly defined.
It's not clearly defined, so it becomes subjective.
Correct.
So any employee of the building department decides whether it's renovation or whether it's demo.
Well, a full demo is pretty clear. When you see it, everything is gone, is proposed to be removed.
That means everything's gone.
Everything is proposed to be removed.
Yeah, anything that's not a demo then is a renovation.
Right.
And so there can be no restrictions. There could, be no more than one wall torn down without review.
Say that again?
Say the house has 4 walls. So there's no way to have a regulation that says, okay, you can't have any more than one wall gone without a review. It's just that
no,
it's just an open invitation for everybody to do what they want to do, basically, is what it comes down to.
What we've done at a staff level, when we've had applications coming in the last year or two, since this demolition definition has been put into the Historic Preservation Ordinance, when an application comes into the building department, they often get brought over to the planning department for what is called okay to submit. In other words, if there's not something, it's not a hillside, it's not a major thoroughfare, it's a check. Some of these that have come in that have been appearing to be full demos, we have basically said, the purpose of this is not the same thing as what you would see when you're looking at the identification of a renovation for what part of the building code gets applied. The purpose of this identification of demo is that we're not losing a historic resource. That's different. And it's more important because it says, there's something about this property that because it was built prior to 1969, we take a second look at it, right? When we get those at the staff level at the counter and we see that this is looking more like a removal down to 1 or 2 walls, we tell them this is not renovation. We consider this demolition, and you'd have to review it and process it that way. So when they come into us that way, we're able to inform the applicant. It's just that they don't always come in that way for us.
Do we know how this one came in?
Well, from what I understood, this one has had no permits made on it. This demo's been done with no permits.
That's right.
So this wasn't even brought into the city in any form, is my understanding.
So what's the fine for that?
Normally, it's double the cost of the permit fees. So if your normal permitting fees for that house would have been $8,000, it would be a $16,000 permit fee. The penalty is payment of the application fees twice, or doubling.
So it's really insignificant to people who can afford to tear down, and rebuild. It's insignificant. $1,000 is really nothing. 8,000, double.
Yeah.
So
16,000.
But if you would look at this specific example, if I were looking at this on paper, not knowing the house, I would have said this is a renovation. It's an H-shaped house. They kept 2 wings and the fireplace. They basically tore down the center of the house. If you didn't know what this looked like and the history of it, I would have approved it too as a renovation on paper.
But what Ken said is that houses built before a certain time, they take another look at. So maybe somebody would have taken another look at this.
He's correct in the way he's characterizing this. He's correct. Had this one actually come through with what it is, it probably would have allowed to go through because it's, as he says, there's a whole lot of the house that's being retained, sort of. The person might not have used the judgment to say it's too much.
Mr. Chair, just a reminder that we're on comments, not discussion. This is board member comments.
Right,
so.
okay, yes, all right. So Vincent, I'll just let you have your thought.
Well, just one question. One would assume that demolition has occurred, that an applicant would have to submit a building permit for new construction on the same site. So has that in fact occurred? And you don't demolish a site with not anticipating a new addition or a new construction on the same site.
Well, often you do, yes. Actually, the house that you had before you today was a demolition with no intention of building anything. So yes, those do occur.
But an owner would be requesting something. They're not going to leave a part of a house there open to the elements.
I don't know whether anything was submitted on this one or not. From what I'm hearing anecdotally here, it sounds like nothing has been submitted for permit.
So I personally don't feel that the designating houses is a feasible solution to this problem. And I understand that discussion point of the meeting. Can we put this on a future agenda so we can discuss more fully possible viable solutions to this problem?
Yes, that would be a good thing to do. You will have coming forward here in the next couple of months the discussion of demolition in terms of changes to the city's municipal code relative to demolition. That might be a good time to also have that discussion.
Now, folks, so are there any other board member comments? Okay, thank you. Dick.
On a lighter note, positive actually, Ken, I think you really will enjoy this. The folks at Emerson and Farrar Jewelry Store, when I shared with you the brochure, and then you gave us a wonderful review of things that were not as appropriately said. So I shared that with the owners because I knew they would really be, they really do care, I think, and they're excited about having that store. And so they've come back to me and said, okay, we're going to redo our brochure, because they have thousands of these. But we would want your input as to the corrections of the brochure revisions. So is the best way for me to approach this, I've already shared with them your comments, and then have them take that and put that into language and come back, and ask you to review it again?
I can review it for them if they'd like, yes.
I think it's very positive that we have these kind of folks in the community that really do care and are willing to spend the money. They basically just lease that store. They don't even own it. So I think it's and they've been dying to do something. As you know, they've offered doing after events and anything that we want to be able to showcase and show it off. So, okay, so
And
I will.
just as a reminder, I believe at your February meeting, you're going to be having a public hearing on the amendments to the Oasis Hotel designation.
Okay.
Dining hall and storefronts.
Okay, so in the
You
meantime.
received the Historic Resources report on that a couple of months ago.
Okay, so in the meantime, I should just go ahead and.
If you want, sure. I can.
Have them start doing their, what they think, take that information and put it into text, and then I'll get it over to you to look at. Okay. I'd just like to, on project status, where we are with in the Steve McQueen house, there was discussion as to those board members that did not get to see it, and also they were to come back with the plans. I believe that Bill LaVoy requested on the befores. Is that?
Staff is doing the tree locations on the site, and then you had also requested a narrative in terms of the restoration work that they're doing.
Right.
We have communicated with the builder. He has not responded to us.
You're working with them on that. So maybe at the next meeting, we'll have something up. So, okay. And is there, will we be having a site visit of the Barrett residence?
Yes, we've got that site visit as well as the site visit for Oasis. It will be scheduled this
So
month.
that'll be coming up this month? This month, oh, good,
Yes.
site visits, right?
Yes.
Okay, same with Oasis Hotel. And then, Flynn, on the status of the amendment to the city in reference to demo, to include financing, can you just tell me again, I'm sorry to keep asking you this, but I've kind of lost track of where we are with it.
Yeah. You will recall that we did the resolution last month that City Council
Yes.
had requested, so that's been done. Staff has been authorized to go ahead and proceed working on it. The Planning Commission is also interested in the topic, so we might have a joint subcommittee of HSPB and Planning Commission working on this
And that will be when, do you think?
in the next couple of months.
In the next couple of months?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. The last thing, on a good note, is just want to share with everybody that the new tax, on the final tax bill that preserves historic tax credit, that got a note from the National Trust for Historic Preservation that the 20% federal historic tax credit was retained in the final tax bill. So that should be an incentive for anybody who is interested in doing that tax credit. And maybe now we can go back and have discussions again with Jay. I know he was waiting on this to happen, to see how we can again help potential owners and developers utilize that tax credit to try to incentivize them to or the property, such as the racquet club. That's it.
Anyone else? Flynn, a member of our audience has been here throughout today's meeting, and he did speak earlier today. Is it appropriate for me to invite him back? He's indicated that there is something he'd like to add.
The chair, you may invite him forward to speak.
All right. Jay, would you like to come forward? Did you have something else you wanted to add, I think, on our discussion on...
Thank you. I appreciate that. As I sit here today, I'm reminded of being on this board 10 years ago and talking about the very same thing that happened today. Why is it still happening 10 years later? Why do we not have a trigger? We have a survey from 2004, 2005. We have another survey. We have a lot of smart people in this town who are aware of historic preservation, who are aware of the houses that were built by John Porter Clark in the 30s and early 40s. When I was on the board, I had proposed someone reaching out to the real estate community, and I know we have at least one realtor on this board, about having a master list where, the Douglas Association of Realtors works with City Hall to have a list of all the historically significant properties, whether they be pre-1960 or 65, whatever your benchmark age is now, or your benchmark year, or whether they be architecturally significant, or whether they be a celebrity-owned property. I don't think it would be hard to put that list together, and I'm happy to help with it. The trick is figuring out how to make it mesh between, city, the public, the commissioners, and the realtors. The owners of Via Lola made it very clear what the house was. They said what year it was built. They said it was John Porter Clark. They said it was in the original family. They have the original blueprint, which you brought with them today. So the city could have had those. The realtor knew about them. I'm just saying that there's a breakdown, a huge lack of communication. I was walking by the house every week after it sold, and they were cleaning up the palm trees, and then they were taking away foliage, and I thought, oh, good, they're going to do something, because the owners told me they were very careful to sell it to somebody who said they were going to preserve the house. And of course, this has happened time and time again. But this is a disgrace. This was probably, and some people won't agree with me, one of the most significant houses in Las Palmas. It was completely untouched. Completely untouched, all original. So I just think there needs to be a way. I don't know if you guys can form a subcommittee with members of the public, or if you can do a subcommittee on your own with city council or the planning department, but there needs to be some way of creating something new, a new document, a new understanding that prevents this from happening again.
Great, thank you. I think we've asked staff to put this on our agenda in February as a discussion item, so the discussion will continue. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I had one board comment. It's not a historic property, but it is a little yogurt shop in the center of downtown Palm Springs. It's a Tutti Frutti, I think it's called. Very successful business. I go there myself quite often. But they have added some lights to the windows that are flashing and racing and doing all kinds of really distractive things.
Submit it to code enforcement.
Thank you.
We had a similar situation like that with some lights that were installed on one of the downtown businesses on the second store, a pizza place, and that did go through as code enforcement. We worked with the restaurant owner, and they did remove them. So it's a matter of submitting it to code enforcement.
In my humble opinion, because I do go to this business often and I know that it's successful, I think they've done themselves a disservice. It's almost off-putting, this masquerading of the storefront with these lights and all. So if you would direct that to the appropriate party. Anyone else?
Do you have an address, Gary? Are you going to be submitting the code complaint?
I'm happy to. Oh, Tutti Frutti. 245 South Palm Canyon Drive. Somehow we've got a frequent user here. Yeah. That was excellent. All right. So no further board comments. Staff, please.
I only have mentioned that I know that there's been interest in the progress we're making on historic markers, and there's one ready for us to pick up, so I'll be picking that up later today, and there are others that I have that I'm waiting on proposals. Facilities picked up Tockwitz Plaza, Robinson's, and the Shell gas station late last month, so those will be going in the next few weeks, I believe. So we're making progress.
And Ken, on that note, the Dr. Hugh Stevens house on Morongo Road?
I'm waiting for them to tell me once they've purchased their rock. I actually had a conversation with the owner.
Mr. Metcalf.
Correct.
Yes.
And he worked with, he says, yes, this is where we want it. I said, this is the size of the marker. You tell me when the rock's in place, we'll get facilities over to install it.
Okay.
So that's what we're waiting on,
All
we're
right.
waiting on a rock.
Yes, well, I've actually spoken to Mr. Metcalf. He is in the process of selling the home.
Oh.
And he is committed to having this rock and this plaque installed prior to the new owner, who is
Terrific.
also a huge fan of the house. So I can prompt him again. I thought on January 6th was the date that I had remembered he was having a rock dropped on the, a boulder,
Right,
a sizable boulder.
Exactly.
Dropped on the property.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more thing, real quick. An update on the historical markers for La Serena and Orbit's Inn.
I've got one of those that's in process, and I think the other one I'm waiting for the proposal. I don't remember which one is ready right now. I've got to go back to my desk and see, but there is one that I'm picking up.
Had both owners, contact me.
They've contacted me also.
And I'm kind of working with, also, it's kind of touchy because I'm also working with Lars on maybe an after event there.
Yeah.
So every time I talk to him, I'm like, oh, I hope he doesn't ask me again. He's been very nice about it.
Yeah. No, those are ones we're working on.
One of the things the board had talked about was possibly presenting the markers at the HSPB meetings. Is that something that you'd still like to do?
As opposed to getting them installed on the properties?
Well, presenting them here at the meeting and then installing them on the properties. I think that's what you had requested.
I'm happy to give them recognition, but I wouldn't want to stall installation of plaques till April 15th, and then God knows how long it would be after that. So,
I think that you had talked about doing it every month at the board
Oh.
meeting as the plaques become available.
never mind. Yes, no, understood. Okay. Then, yes, I'm kind of comfortable with that, certainly.
About that.
Fine. Thanks for that clarification. I thought at the HSPV meeting. I mean,
Symposium.
Anything else?
I just have one item, and I hate to keep on bringing this up. Code enforcement, please, 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 if you see something happening, call code enforcement immediately. And with via Lola, if they don't have a building permit and someone suspects that work is going on, we can get in there more quickly if you call code enforcement right away. With any property happening here in town, just if you suspect work is going on without a permit, please call code enforcement rather than waiting until this meeting.
And so then that would include these lights in the window.
Exactly.
I mean, whether they have a permit on it or they got a permit, we should just still let them know. Okay.
It's best to call code enforcement while it's still fresh.
Okay, no, understood. Anybody else? Anything else?
Just a follow-up, how long does it take code enforcement to respond once they receive a complaint?
Once they receive a complaint, they're usually pretty good within 24 to 48 hours of going out and visiting. It just depends on what they get the call and what type of a violation it might be.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.